Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Cal Sandhu, your personal and travel size lawyer here, as always, to break down complex legal issues into simple and easy to understand advice. Today is a common issue for landowners and one that I get a lot of questions about, which is what to do if someone is encroaching on your land or overstepping property boundaries, whether it's a fence creeping over your boundary, an overgrown tree growing onto your side, or a shed sitting on what you know is your property. Boundary disputes can cause real tension between neighbours. But don't worry, because in the next 9 minutes, I'm going to reveal to you what legal encroachment actually means, how to correctly determine your exact property boundaries, and as always, the best step-by-step process you can take to challenge neighbours who are literally overstepping their bounds. So let's get into it. So what is encroachment? In simple terms, encroachment is when a neighbour trespasses onto your property by building or extending structures beyond their property line, whether it's a fence or a building, a driveway, or even trees and plants without your permission. So if that is the situation you're in, despite what your neighbour may be telling you, they are breaking the law. Now, some of you may be thinking, is it really that big of a deal if their fence is a few inches over my land? Well, it can be. Even small encroachments can lead to bigger problems down the line, like disputes over property value, land use, and even legal ownership of that land. So it is really important to deal with it early instead of allowing it to happen. And you'll see why later. But before you start contemplating an all-out feud with your neighbour, you need to consider the steps you can take to resolve this peacefully and legally. Now, the first step in solving any boundary dispute is understanding exactly where your property boundaries are. This step is crucial before bringing any action. Here are the different ways you can figure that out. So number one, check your property deeds or title documents. Now, your property's legal boundaries should be outlined in the deeds or title documents that you received when you bought the property. Now, these documents often include a map or a plan showing where your land ends and where your neighbour's begins. Sometimes these maps are a bit vague though, so don't worry if the lines aren't crystal clear. You can still figure things out using the next two steps. So, step two, look for physical markers. Now, you want to check for any physical markers that show where the boundary is. This could be something as simple as a fence, a hedge, or a stone wall. Just remember, these physical features aren't always 100% accurate. They may have shifted over time, or someone might have put them in the wrong spot originally. But if after those two methods, you're still unsure of your exact property boundaries, or if the boundary line is really in dispute, this is where getting a professional land surveyor comes in useful. Now, a surveyor will use precise measurements to determine the exact boundaries of your property based on the legal description in your title documents. Their report will be your most reliable piece of evidence in any dispute. Now, hiring a surveyor does cost money, but it's worth it to avoid costly legal battles later. Okay, so you've figured out where your boundary lines are, and it looks like your neighbour is encroaching on your land. The next step might seem simple, but it is crucial. Talk to your neighbour. Now, a lot of boundary disputes can be resolved just by having an honest and polite conversation. Maybe your neighbour didn't even realise they were building over that boundary. Ensuring this process is amicable will vastly increase your chances of a swift resolution. Now, here are some tips for this conversation. Be calm and polite. Bring your evidence to them. So if you've checked your property documents or had a survey done, show your neighbour the information that you've gathered. Be open to solutions that work for both of you. But look, what if the conversation doesn't go well? Or worse, your neighbour just outright refuses to do anything, which I can imagine is probably the case for many of you watching this video. Well, that's when you need to take things to the next level. So if your neighbour isn't willing to cooperate, it's important to start documenting everything. This is going to be crucial if you end up needing to take legal action later. So here is what to do. Number one, take photos and videos. Record the encroachment from different angles. Show how far it extends onto your property. Number two, keep notes of your conversations with them. Write down the dates and details of any discussions you've had with your neighbour about the issue. And number three, save any written communication. So if you've sent emails or texts or letters to your neighbour, keep copies of them, as this can serve as evidence that you tried to resolve the dispute amicably. Now, let's get on to the important section of what legal action you can take and under what law you will make your claim. Now, in many cases, encroachment is considered a form of trespass. Trespass doesn't just mean someone walking onto your land, it can also mean someone building on it or using it without your permission. Now, if your neighbour refuses to remove the encroachment, you can file a claim for trespass and seek an order from the court to have that encroachment removed. Now, Pay attention, because this next principle is extremely important to understand before you rush to court, which is that you might be a victim of adverse possession. Now, adverse possession is a legal principle that allows someone to claim ownership of land that they don't legally own if they've been using it for over a certain amount of time, usually 10 to 12 years, without the original owner's objection. In other words, to make this really simple for you, if your neighbour has been encroaching on your land for over 10 years and you haven't said anything or objected, they might be able to claim legal ownership over that part of your land, and there is very little you could do about it. That is why it's important to deal with encroachments as soon as you notice them. The longer it goes on, the harder it can be to challenge later. Now, don't immediately start worrying. It can be a little bit more complicated than what I've just said, so I would recommend seeking advice from a lawyer if you believe you may be a victim of adverse possession and someone has been using your land for a long time with your knowledge. Now, hopefully it doesn't come to this, but if talking to your neighbour hasn't worked, and trying to resolve things informally hasn't worked, your final step will be to take legal action. And here is what that could look like. First, a letter before action. So before you head off to court, you or your lawyer will send a formal letter to your neighbour. This is often called a letter before action. In this letter, it will outline the problem, explain that they are encroaching on your property, and request that they remove the encroachment. This must be done before going to court. After this will usually be mediation. If there's still no cooperation, you would attempt mediation. Mediation involves a neutral third party who helps both sides reach an agreement. It's less formal and less expensive than going to court, and often leads to many better outcomes, so worth a try. Now, please note, many local councils offer mediation for boundary disputes. And number 3, if mediation doesn't work, your final option will be to take the dispute to court. In court, you can ask for an injunction to stop your neighbour encroaching on your land and potentially seek damages if their actions have caused you financial loss or distress. Remember though, you'll need all the evidence I advised you to gather, like survey results, photos, records of communications to present to your case. Now, in my experience, the courts generally favour resolving property boundary disputes based on fairness. So having a clear, organised proof of the encroachment will strengthen your position. Now, that wraps up the advice for today's video. So if you think your neighbour is encroaching on your land, remember, start by understanding exactly where your property boundaries lie. Get a survey done if you need to, talk to your neighbour, and document all conversations and evidence, including photos and videos. If that doesn't work, you have got options, remember, whether it's mediation, which I highly recommend, or legal action. But try to resolve things as peacefully as possible. So if you've liked or learned anything of value from this video, maybe give it a quick thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for weekly advice on navigating life's most common legal challenges. If you've got experiences of encroachment or boundary disputes of your own, I'd love to hear your stories in the comments down below and how you dealt with it. And I'll see you in the next video.